Hi guys, I'm Paul and this is Simon.
Hey everybody.
And welcome to the June webinar. I do feel a little bit like, and maybe some of you guys have got a little bit of deja vu here. I know we've obviously got some new members with us tonight, but those that dialed in last week, we did actually run this session last week, but we had a little bit of a technical glitch. Now, to be fair, it was the first time that we've had such a thing, but the viewers, you guys couldn't see our maps, so whilst we could talk you through the maps, you couldn't see the changes. Turns out that was a little technical switching box that had gone wrong, but we felt it was best to redo this session. So thank you very much for rejoining us. We have tested and we have tested. We are good to go and we are ready to do some, what do we have, Simon? We have ECM training
We have ECM this week, ECM gasoline, looking at the Bosch MED17 ECU, and whilst it's on a Volkswagen Audi Group, the logic that we go through today and obviously our online course on Remap 101 is applicable to a wide range of ECUs, not just the Bosch family, but the tuning logic can be applied to gasoline as a whole. Very
good. Now, before we start with the actual training session, I know last week I mentioned, I want to mention again, a big up to AutoTuner. AutoTuner at the beginning of the month invited myself, Simon, and some of their other quite large distributors from around the world to attend what they call the Apex show. So this is an open day really just for AutoTuner, where their buyers came along, had a chat, and they were able to show some new technology to us, some vehicles that are up and coming, some protocols that they're working on, and I have to say it was a bloody good event.
Yeah, it was really good. I mean, obviously we took a lot of the feedback from you, the community, from our own dealer network and our own experience with the tool and fed that in.
People perhaps mention the mail unlock?
I think the mail-in unlock may have been mentioned.
Was one of the main themes?
Got a little bit heated that session, but I think there was overall a really, really good experience with them, and they were very open and receptive to recommendations that we got and sort of the needs and requirements of the industry.
It was good to hear the mail unlock from both sides, you know, why they're doing it, how the technology is important to them. And you know, to be fair, there are no other solutions right now, so it might not be ideal, but
better to have something than have nothing.
Absolutely. Really, really good event. And then the other thing I just wanted to mention is Alientech. If you're running Alientech tools, you may be aware there's some very strong special offers on just for the month of June. If you are missing protocols on your tool, for example, if you've got a tool with only OBD and you haven't yet added boot bench to it, they're offering some very, very strong discount to fill those gaps. So if you've got a tool, speak to your reseller, speak to your master who you purchased the tool from, and they'll probably be able to give you a really, really competitive quote to add additional protocols to your tool. So I think there are two things that are going on a little bit in the industry that caught my eye this month.
On a training point of view, obviously, we did a little bit of training today. I just want to say thank you for everyone that attended the Magic Masterclass that we ran last week. So that was our first in what is now going to be a series of Stage X Masterclasses going through different ECU types. Last week we had the EDC17 C46 Volkswagen Audi Group 2-hour live masterclass. We took questions from those that had joined the course, that had paid for the course on there. It is available on Remap 101 for those that couldn't make it and attend the live class, so you can go and view it obviously online on Remap 101. But it was taking you through the diesel strategy and logic. So some of the elements we touch upon with our free webinars, but really into detail, looking at all those intricacies and relationships between the maps, which was really, really positive. Some great feedback and questions from that. So much so that we're already planning the next one, which is going to be the 9th of July. And that'll be a Mercedes CRD3, so another diesel masterclass, but by popular demand, that'll be the Mercedes Delphi CRD3 ECU. And then we'll have, and I can't remember the date, I want to say August. No one's nodding in the background. I think it's August. We've got our Stage X gasoline masterclass. We'll be running a similar one then as well.
Okay, very good. Conscious we have a lot of ground to cover, obviously, and we need to make up a little bit of ground that we didn't cover last week. So shall we crack on at this point, Simon?
Yeah, sure. So those of you who are a little bit familiar with ECM, obviously we're not going to spend time today going through uploading the file, finding the driver. We're jumping straight into having the driver already open. If you do want to cover off any of those elements, or you're brand new to the software, we have the full suite of courses taking you right from the very first installation through to finding your driver for the first time, even what a driver is for those who aren't familiar. Of course, the driver is the list of maps on the screen, but taking you through all those steps online again on remap101.co.uk, you can check those out in your own time.
One thing I will quickly add, if you don't mind, Simon, we do put ourselves in the line of fire here doing this live, and as we saw last week, it didn't go quite to plan, but the point, we do it live because we want to give you the opportunity to answer any questions, and that is the same again for tonight. So it's a question and answer session. I hope this isn't us just sitting here preaching away and burbling and going through all this information. It is your opportunity. If we say something that you don't understand or you need a bit more information on, please do ask the question. We have Brett, Question Master, just off camera, ready to take your questions. And where we can, we're going to feed them straight into the session here. So don't sit there thinking, that didn't make any sense to me, or I wonder what they mean by that. Please ask the question.
Yeah, now's the opportunity.
Why we do them live. If you're watching later on YouTube, you can still, of course, email us your questions, and we'll always do our best to come back to you too.
Yeah, so whether you're Zed in Australia with it on in the back of the workshop, or anyone else watching with its YouTube or on our websites, do send those questions in. We do welcome them, and we want to help give that information out to the tuning community to improve the knowledge and understanding out there for all tuners.
All right, let's go
jump into it now.
Yeah.
Okay, we've mentioned this a little bit further on this ECU on previous webinars, but going through the ECM Titanium software, we're going to go into each of these maps in a little bit more depth here that we can do. This ECU is brilliant because it's got both types of strategies for a typical gasoline vehicle. It's got the air-based strategy. What we mean by there is air requests, air limiters. So requested engine load, and our air limiters will be things like our turbo limiter, our boost pressure limiters, or cylinder filling limiters. And we've also got torque-based strategies. So that's things like your torque requests, torque limiters, gear-based torque limiters, etc. Yep. Anyone that's ever tuned a diesel will be very familiar with that type of strategy. The MED17 is that perfect sort of sweet spot between both of these sort of architectures and these strategies in the ECU. Everything from your very first ECUs into the late 80s, early 90s started with air-based, right the way through to sort of the mid-2010s. You've still got air-based strategies in ECUs, but they start to transition a little bit more towards torque-based. Now, we've had a couple of questions about things like MG1s, people wanting to look at the brand new Bosch ECUs. Whilst they are predominantly a torque-based logic and strategy from a tuning point of view, they actually still have air-based maps in there and strategies that if you don't tune them, you won't get the full potential. So this is a great ECU to sort of give you an example and highlight both of those types of strategies in there.
My experience of this, Simon, before you crack right into the gasoline, is I always find the gasoline is a little bit more complicated, and to me, the logic isn't always quite so easy to follow.
I'm going to use my wonderful trademarked phrase of yes and no.
You've got the T-shirt.
I have got the T-shirt. It can be yes. Diesel, very straightforward. We're talking about Newton meters. Everyone understands torque, Newton meters, foot pounds, fuel quantities, millimeters cubed. It's all very logical, very sensible data. When we start to look at gasoline, whilst we've got some maps that show Newton meters and things in there, it's predominantly more percentage-based maps. So we've got torque as a percentage, we've got air as a percentage.
To me, it just becomes a little bit more complicated and not so obvious what to change or how much to change it by.
The trick is, and we go, as I said, in great detail through our online courses and in-person courses, is understanding that whilst it says, for example, percentage of air, because this is an air-based strategy ECU, just think of air as your request value. It doesn't matter what it's measured in. Okay, it's percentage of something. If we understand that that's the currency of this ECU, the overriding architecture of the ECU, then wherever we see air, we can relate it back to other maps. As we're going to see now, when we look at our requested engine load map, and we look at the percentage of air inside of this map table, this is our request map. It doesn't matter that it's percentage of air. It could be tyres. Oh, we have 170 tyres in there. It doesn't matter. This gives us our value that we're going to look at other maps, such as our spark advance, our fueling, to see a commonality between them, a link, a connection between them.
Okay.
So even if you don't understand necessarily what the percentage of air is in terms of the engine, it's effectively going to be our boost pressure if you think of it that way on a turbo engine, we can then correlate percentage of air against the other map tables, and then it starts to clear up the logic of the ECU and how we need to approach the tuning.
Okay, show us what you got.
So we have our requested engine load map on the screen here, and again, with anything from a performance-based tuning point of view, we're going to be looking towards the right-hand side of this map table because that's really where the maximum power is going to be. Throttle across the top, RPM down the side, maximum standard power and torque output is going to be on the right-hand side of this table under heavier throttle input. A quick pro tip when it comes to tuning: if you're looking at doing performance tuning stage 1, for example, stage 2 or beyond, this is really sort of the focus that you're going to have in terms of tuning area. It's going to be the right-hand side of the table or the higher throttle percentage. If you make changes down here, if it hasn't got any massive hardware modifications, so if you put big cams on the car, you may need to make changes here for the amount of air required. But if you start to make changes down here on a normal stage 1, stage 2 car, you're going to find the vehicle potentially hunting or surging or a very erratic throttle response on the vehicle. So whenever you're looking at any tables, one of the key things to do is remember the strategy that you're applying as the tuner. Where do I need to be in that table from a performance point of view? So on the right-hand side, we've got our values. We're going to look at this last column. We're also going to look for approximately our peak torque on the engine in terms of the RPM band. And this is where data logging comes into it. Whether you've got the KES, an AutoTuner, a dyno, whatever it is that you're using for your data logging, seeing the torque curve, seeing where that peak torque is important for the gasoline engines, because that's going to give us a point at which we can use to measure all of the other map tables against.
That makes sense.
So it's a bit of common sense there. There's no point in using one measuring device for one map and a completely different set of measuring tools and equipment for the next. When we look through, we're going to analyse, typically at 4 or 4,500 RPM, the standard value in that map table under maximum throttle. So let's take 4,500 RPM. Our peak torque is around this area. We've got 167% of air. We can see that it's pretty much the same value all the way to the end of the table. I'm going to take note of that because that's going to be really important for me when I start to look at all the other map tables to see if that value is supported in things like our fueling maps, our timing maps, and so on. So I put down my requested engine load, and I can see I've got 167% of air. So I can use that as a measure against the other tables. I'll also look for any clues and indications in the map table for any higher values. And this is the exact same thing we do with a torque request map on a diesel. Where is my peak torque in the RPM band? What is the maximum request? And are there any higher values giving me a potential indication of a higher amount of air or torque, whatever it may be, that the ECU supports and therefore the engine can support? So in this case, I'll take a little note of 174% of air. This gives us our first marker, our first two pieces of data that we can use to then benchmark the other map tables against. So again, it doesn't matter that it's percentage of air. It could be any unit of measurement in there. The unit is not irrelevant, but the understanding of percentage of air isn't key to this. Knowing that that is our request map, that is the important thing, because then when we look at things like our fueling and our timing, which we're going to look at now, or in a moment, sorry, we'll see a common denominator against them. So if we looked at our request, it's in percentage of air, then we need to look at the limiter for air. There's no point in jumping now to torque or to fuel or anything else. We need to go straight to our limiters, and that's going to be our turbo system. And now we've got a lot of maps in here. We've got limiter of turbo pressure APS against atmospheric pressure. We've got turbo pressure in HPA and various factors and corrections. But this map down here, and this is what I really like about ECM, it gives you the unit of measure for the actual map table itself. So you can see at the top level, before having to open 20 map tables, this one has percentage of air. So it must directly relate, hopefully, to our target cylinder filling. We can see on here on the left-hand side, this is a single row or single column map. So it's a 16 by 1 or 1 by 16. So we have one string of data here. And we've also got multiple maps at the bottom of the screen. As we can see there, page up and page down lets us navigate between them. We're just going to enable this first map just so we can look at the data that's here. And we're looking again in around that 4 to 4,500 RPM point to cross-check this data against our request. Now, if this limiter said 300% of air in here, well, it's not the limiter that's actually holding the car back. It may be a table that exists in the ECU, but the manufacturer's not chosen to use it. So they put a value that's so high in there, it exists, but it's never going to interfere with the normal running of the car. But in this case, it says 140% of air. Well, that is limiting our request. Our request is 167. Our limiter, so our limiter of turbo pressure, which is also, if you look at some of the other softwares, will often be called maximum filling, is at 140% of air. So straight away we can see we've got a request at 167 and a limiter at 140. There's already potential headroom to increase our limits up. And we've also got the value of 174 on our request as well. So potentially we could go from 140 to 174 if the ECU supports that in other areas, and if of course mechanically the car can support that as well. So our investigation phase we're going to continue through. We've seen our request, we've seen a limiter, and there are multiple on here. Of course, we do recommend you go through each of these and check every single one, but just to make sure we've got enough time to cover each of the areas we need, we're going to move on now to our timing area. So we've seen how much air is coming into the vehicle. We're going to move now to our timing. Now, whether you go to timing next or fuel or whatever it may be, it's not a problem the order you go in, but we do recommend strongly for anything gasoline based, look at the air first and look at either the timing or the fueling next.
In a chunk.
Yes, in that sort of core sort of 3 areas to look at to begin with, just to get your foundational information. And the map we're going to look at is going to be our Spark Advance base map. So again, multiple maps at the bottom of the screen. I'm just going to enable that first one because we're going to focus on the top level map for now. And at this point, I'm not interested in the values in the table themselves. Degrees of timing in here is wonderful, it's lovely. We're going to need that from a tuning point of view. However, at this point, it's the values in the axis at the top that are important for me. If we see percentage of air is running across this top axis. Well, our limiter is holding us here. So we're limited at 140% of air. However, the table has support to go to 170% of air. So now we have our first sort of indicator that not just the request has got a higher value, but the ignition timing potentially supports 170% of air.
Bit of a common theme building here.
Yeah, it's this investigation phase. And those that are familiar with diesels will have done this quite a lot. They'll look at things like the SOI maps, again, the timing maps on a diesel. Okay, it's not Spark Advance, but it's a very similar sort of logic and approach. You're doing the same thing. Diesels, you're looking for fuel quantities and torque amounts. In the gasoline, we're typically looking for percentage of air, or cylinder filling. And we can see this is a real, genuine, active table in terms of the data, because if we look, let's take the last row. At 140% of air, we've got 19.5 degrees of timing. 155% of air, the timing decreases slightly and decreases even further at 170% of air. Mm-hmm. Well, we all know when you increase pressure in the engine, the combustion happens quicker, much more violently. We don't need to start that combustion as early. You run more boost, you run less timing. And we can see that logic through the standard ECU, through the standard data that's here. The fact that these values are scaled to that 170% tells us this isn't just an extension of the table and they had 2 extra spare columns. This has actually been calibrated and thought through and developed at the factory level. So it means we've got supporting data from the factory to run 170% of air. Brilliant. So we've got our air, we have our quantity of air now, we have our timing, we have our injection angle, sorry, spark advance angle I should say. So we know when we're igniting the combustion, but we need to look at the fuel. We can't have an explosion if we've only got air and a spark. We need 3 things for that combustion to happen. So the next thing we're going to look at is going to be our fueling. So we come up here to our injection system, and the temptation is to look at our requested Lambda. That's the first map everybody looks at to try and work out how much air is in there, because you think about it, we looked at the request for cylinder filling, our requested engine load, we've looked at our base timing, well it must be our requested Lambda, because the terminology, it kind of makes sense, it's similar, we look at the request. However, the percentage across the top is not measured in air. This is a measurement of torque. Our requested Lambda map is for things like our harder acceleration, our open loop driving. So this is when we're almost on boost, we're trying to accelerate the vehicle. This isn't for all driving conditions, this is for a very specific set of driving conditions and strategies. And it's activated, so I just clicked on the axis, it's activated at a torque threshold, so at 45% of torque and above, this map starts to activate. The values, we'll look back at in a second when we start to get into our modifications, but for now, there's nothing that supports the quantity of air. It's all about the air that we need to investigate. So that's where we look at maps like our Lambda for component protection. So Lambda for component protection is a really important map inside of the ECU. This isn't a target map, this isn't the desired fueling, this is I need to protect the components. What is my fueling ratio allowed to be? What is my air to fuel ratio allowed to be? And again, not interested in the values in the table at this point. We're going to need to look at them in detail for tuning, but at this point we're just trying to see, can we run more than 140% of air in this engine safely?
Yes, we can.
We can, 170% there. So we put the note down for there. Our component protection says 170% of air. Okay. I said, not going to look at the torque just yet. We've got our 3 core areas now for the engine. We've understood the spark, we've understood our requested engine load, and we've understood our fueling. I'm just going to minimise a couple of these off at the moment because we don't need to really look at the limiters for RPM and speed. Deactivations, which actually is a really cool feature in ECM now. We do mention it a couple of times, but it's really good to see that the drivers are still being updated with newer maps, features and functions. And I'm going to move the overrun, another cool feature that's in there. So those that are looking for the crackles, the burbles, those lovely pops and bangs for off-road use, of course, special functions are now in the drivers as well.
I think that's one thing actually to say about Alientech. I mean, I've been dealing with Alientech for nearly 20 odd years now. The drivers were okay, but they're actually now a lot better, aren't they? I'm seeing them very regularly being updated and getting better and better.
Yeah, and it's not a case of it's just new ECUs they're releasing are having really in-depth drivers. They are constantly working through the back catalogue, if you like,
I have seen
of
it,
updating historical drivers that are in there as well. So it sounds like a salesy sort of thing, but if you have got an ECM and you've not used it in a while, or the subs have expired and things, it is definitely something worth exploring. As we've mentioned before, it's a great bolt-on for those that are working with Winols. You're struggling to find a map, throw it into ECM, look at the driver, and oh, there's the overrun map that I've spent 2 hours looking for inside of Winols. You've got the data really quickly then. So it does support a wide range of tuning programs as well. So we've got our requests, we've got a couple of limiters on there. We now need to look in a couple of other places, and we now need to look at our turbo system, because there could be some supporting information in our turbo system. It makes sense. It's the area that really controls the amount of air that we've got. So when we look at our turbo system, we've got maps like our limiter for turbo pressure, HPA, and we can see some values on here. We've got in our map table, no longer percentages of air. We've got a real quantity of air now measured in millibar. We can see we have 1200 down to 1100, nearly 1000 millibar there dropping off to for our turbo pressure. But the scaling across the top goes from 350 to 1400 atmospheric. I don't think we're ever running at 1.4 bar of atmospheric pressure, and we're definitely running out of oxygen at 350 millibar. But it's another map table that gives us some data on there. So that tells us 1250 millibar dropping down to 1055 at 4500 RPM. So again, it's all about collecting data at this point. There's a couple more maps we're going to look at, and then we'll start to decrypt that data and understand the changes we can make and start making those modifications to unlock the potential of that engine. So turbo pressure HPA. Now this one is far more supportive. We know as we start to increase our torque on the engine, as the RPM starts to increase, our boost pressure should increase as well. This map table supports that when you look at the values at 4,500 RPM. The previous one that we looked at, just get the name back up, limiter of turbo pressure over atmospheric, was holding us back at a bar. But this effectively turbo pressure at base height is the full technical name of this map, is showing supported values of 1305 millibar, or 1.3 bar of boost pressure. So we take note of that information. As we look through the ECU, we will see different maps giving us different bits of information on there that we can use to build that understanding of the engine components capabilities and how we can unlock the potential of the engine. But at the moment, I've now got a couple of values that are in millibar, which is really great. You can see the turbo system supporting a higher amount of boost on there, but I don't actually know what the 170 and the 140% of air relate to in terms of pressure. Well, there's a couple of ways you can go about this. The full correct way is to obviously go and plug a data logger in, run the car, safe conditions, ideally on a dyno, data log in the closest to one-to-one gear you can, and actually see what the boost readings are, what the specified boost is and what the actual boost is. That will give you an indication if your specified boost is 1 bar and your actual boost is 0.7, well, your request is equivalent to 1 and your actual 0.7. What we can do here though is if we adjust these values slightly, so we apply a little formula to these. If we take 70 off the value, so in a little bit of maths here, I do apologise, I know it's late in the day. If we take our 140% of air for our limiter, take 70 off. That leaves us with 70 as a number. Multiply it by 10. Gives us our millibar.
Right.
It's an approximate calculation. These conversions that we see, the percentages of air, are the factory's mathematical and scientific equations that are used for many of the map tables. Some are arbitrary values, they just pluck and put conversions on there, but often these are actually scientific values that have been converted into a real world number for us in terms of percentage of air. But if you take 70 off the value and multiply by 10, that's going to give us about 0.7 bar.
And that's proven, tested?
Test on the vehicle, data log,
Nice.
measure, monitor. It's one thing to be careful of. Often there's a bit of misinformation when you try and Google what's the peak boost pressure of a standard car. You'll often get the overboost number. So people will look at the biggest number it runs, not the constant pressure number. We all know with the turbo system it will always spike on the boost as it starts to build up, and there's the PID controllers that take over. It starts to adjust the wastegate to reduce the turbo speed and adjust the turbo pressure. Those values will drop down, and then you'll get your real boost number as opposed to that sudden surge before it gets it under control. So that gives us an idea of what we're currently running, around 0.7 bar. Well, when we looked at our limiter of turbo pressure, this secondary limiter here, because our percentage of air limiter is the main one, our secondary limiter here is holding us at a bar of boost pressure. So supports a higher value. And when we looked at our turbo pressure HPA map here, 1.3 bar. Well, that's almost double the boost pressure we're running to begin with.
So the tables support it.
There is a lot of capacity inside of this ECU to run more on there. Okay. We'll very quickly look at our torque requests and torque limits before we jump into the modifications. If we look at our torque requests, we can see, just enable that map, 330 Newton meters of torque at the top end. Well, that's lovely, but what has a standard vehicle got? There's no point in looking at the data inside of an ECU unless you understand the standard vehicle specification. So if you don't know the torque output of this vehicle, you need to do the research. Data log and dyno, of course, very important, but also check what the factory says for the vehicle. This is actually in and around 280 Newton meters of torque this standard vehicle is limited to or rated from the factory. So that then supports the request here being at 330. It makes sense. It sits just above our limit. In the same way our requested engine load sits just above our engine load limiter or maximum load limiter. So I'll take a note of that one as well. 330 Newton meters for our torque request. And when we move further down, we can see we've got multiple limiters on this ECU, 400 Newton meters, multiple gear ones. The 1000 Newton meters, by the way, is not a clue. We can almost quadruple the torque output of the vehicle. This shows where we've got a manual vehicle, but there are map tables that exist that will be active for an automatic vehicle. So just because a table is there doesn't mean that is a sudden clue as to the value it can run. We have to apply a bit of logic. We have gear limiters in here, but it's a manual vehicle. The gear limiter values are so high, the ECU is never going to be operating them.
Gotcha. But
the structure exists, they have to have a value. And we go further down, we've got limiter for sport, 334. Well, it's actually slightly above our request. Another one down here at 1000. Limiter for clutch at 5000 on there. And you see there's multiple through this ECU. Anti-jerk at 400. So it's worthwhile familiarising yourself with these maps when you go through the ECU in the ECM Titanium, when you're looking at the driver. Open each of the different maps, understand the values that are there, and as we can see there, the top one, I was looking for it a little bit there in the driver. It's moved around in this one compared to the last one I looked at. We have our maximum torque during shifting, and there is our 280 Newton meters. So if you do have a torque limit on the vehicle, there should be a corresponding map or value that relates to that, especially when you've got a torque-based structure sat inside of the ECU. So we need to decide how much further we're going to increase the car. Now for this, we're going to do a very safe sort of stage one performance tune. We're going to take it to the maximum values that are supported within the ECU tables. We can go beyond those values, but to go beyond the map tables and boundaries, we need to data log, we need it on the dyno, we need it on the road under safe conditions if you don't have access to a dyno, to ensure that the ECU is running the corresponding values that we expect it to when we go beyond the end of the table. Now we could, with operated components, let's say sports cats on the vehicle, downpipes, intercoolers, intakes, all those sort of stage 2 bolt-ons, we can run more boost than the tables show with that 170% of air.
Yep.
But now we are into that data logging area, which is critical because we're now relying on the last column in the table to support a value at 190 or 200% of air. Doesn't mean that mechanically the engine cannot support that, but we need to think of the impact that's going to have within the tuning.
Literally running out of data to run it.
Yeah, so we're then into either rescaling axes or compromising values at the end of the table for that higher number. All doable. We do it day in, day out through our technical support team.
But this is just stage one, operating to data that's predominantly already in the ECU.
Optimising from the standard data that's within the ECU, If you are looking at going further and you're not sort of comfortable with this, we do have our tech support guys. They're on the phone, they're on support tickets 7 days a week. So if you do need to reach out for support or you want even files checking, we do offer that service as well. Send it through our file portal and the guys will look at it and give you an honest opinion and feedback on it.
Well, of course, you can buy a master file.
Yep.
And then it's yours to take apart and see what we've done and what we've changed it to.
Yeah, that's another great way of looking at things, and it's a valid thing just before we go into the modifications. It's no different to looking at two power outputs from the factory. We've got a high horsepower output and a limited edition, a Golf Edition 35 or whatever, Pirelli edition.
How did they do it?
And looking at the standard one, well, hang on, they've got the same components. What did they change? They did this change or that change, or they changed that hardware component. What does that look like inside of the ECU? And that is something, I'll just drag this across so you can see, that is something you can do inside of ECM as well. You can compare between different projects.
Yeah.
So you can open two different projects at the same time and look at, this is a TFSI Audi A3, load the equivalent Audi S3 in, same engine, same ECU, slightly different components, turbo injectors and a few other things, mass airflow
what does the
housing.
map look like?
What does the map look like?
Particularly if you're then adding those components.
You're adding those components, you can now understand what the factory did for that slightly bigger turbo, different injectors, and now you bring in injector calibration across. You're now starting to offer a stage 3 tune on a normal Audi A3 using the data from the factory. So it's all about reverse engineering, I should say, the information and data that's available to hand. So looking at what we've got here, if we do the maths a little bit on there, we saw 140% of air roughly equated to 0.7 bar. We've got one of our limiters sat at 1 bar. But if we look at the stock data that's inside of the ECU, when we looked at our requested engine load, our maximum value was around 174. So we're going to take that as our sort of peak point that we want to go to.
Yep.
So a nice, safe, sort of mild stage 1 tune on there. And if we take the 70 off that, we multiply it by 10, that gives us 1 bar of boost pressure, which is supported by, as we saw here, limiter of turbo pressure. So again, the logic inside the ECU is there. It's all about taking a little bit of time and understanding how these maps all sort of align together and support each other. So the first thing we're going to change is not actually going to be our request, it's going to be our limiter. If we set our limiters to what we want them to be, we then go back to our request and make sure our request is repositioned or rescaled back above the limiter. We must maintain that relationship that the factory has built the ECU and engine to run on. Our request sits slightly above our limiter. Let's change our limit first, and then we can ensure our request sits comfortably back above. So there's a couple of different ways that we can go about modifying this data. We could just go and sort of put a flat percentage change on there and sort of incrementally build it up with the percentage until we get to roughly that 170%. That's going to exaggerate the curve that's already there. Bring that across our row column graphs. Row column bounds. That's all that's going to do is exaggerate the spikes and the curves we've got to the data. Now, when we look at this, it's quite a nice feature actually, where if we click on the map, it shows us on the 2D graphic. I don't want to put a big spike at 1600 RPM. There's no benefit to me there. We have a higher limiter value here because it allows the boost to, almost like overboost, to spike more aggressively to give you that initial sensation of acceleration, but immediately it's cutting you back.
Yep.
Are we going to get the maximum performance from the vehicle by giving everything we possibly can at 1600 RPM and then just watching the boost drop off drastically? Probably not. We need to be looking in this area of the ECU and basically exaggerating where our peak torque is, because the higher up the RPM band we can achieve more torque or develop more torque, the more horsepower we're going to achieve. So to do this, we're going to look at our higher torque area. So that's 4,500 RPM that we've used through this so far. And while there is a higher value at 5,000, We're going to keep it off 4.5 because we want that to be our new sort of peak. And we're going to set that value to 170. Then we're going to click on the difference button, and we're going to look at the increase over here. So we've got difference to show us where the changes are, and we've got the increase to show us what the change is. Because we've got percentage selected, we can see 21.4%. Okay, so 21.42. Then turn the increase off. We're going to put the value back to original. Going to press undo. Or we've got the paste story at the side. If you've selected a few changes on there, you don't want to go back one step, you just want to revert to original. And we're going to start from about 1900 RPM up to 4,500. We're going to right click to bring our floor sum, our interpolation box open, and we're going to select the percentage increment. Again, pro tip, always double check the options that are selected in here. ECM is great at remembering the last option you chose. However, if you last chose to do an absolute increment or overwrite values and you're not paying attention, or the phone goes, a customer walks in, you can suddenly make a drastic change to an ECU that you didn't intend, or make a very small increase that you can't feel. So double check the values that are there. Remember what the numbers were? 21 point...
I don't know, 21 point something.
21.4.
I just remembered it was 21%. Didn't know the
Well,
was
let's leave it nice at 21%. Then we can always correct and adjust these values after. Now, the bigger the number we put in here, this is our area A, where we start to
make a difference.
Make a change, yeah. We start to direct away from the standard values. The bigger the number we put here, the more aggressive that initial change is going to be, but it can actually have a detrimental effect towards the top end where we don't achieve as much in that higher RPM area.
I'm going to predict you're going to put 5 in there.
You've sat in one of these webinars before. You'd have thought after 20 years now you might have known.
It felt logical. It felt about right.
Yeah. So we're typically, and it's not exact sort of rule on there, this is a tuner's prerogative. You may go 7%, you might go 3%, you might go 15%, whatever you want. We're usually about a quarter of the maximum modification.
Yeah, okay.
So we make that change, and we can see we haven't got a spike low down. It is building, but it's now exaggerating towards that top point.
Yeah.
That's area A. So area B, we've built up to our peak. We now want to hold that modification as far down the RPM band as we can.
And you're going to go right to the end of the RPM band?
We're going to go right to the end of the RPM band or to the last positive value. If we suddenly had minus 50 in here somewhere, I don't need to increase or modify that value.
Sure.
And we're going to put 21 on both of these.
Oh, you really are going to hold it. Okay.
So we've built up to it, held towards the end. Now we are maintaining the factory curve here for a couple of different reasons. One, the turbo's only got so much to give. We can make this curve hold a flat line, a flat value of 170% all the way to the end of the RPM band. The turbo isn't going to do that. It's going to run out of speed. It's going to get to a certain point where the wastegate is closed, trying to spin the turbo faster and faster and faster, and it then ends up in an inefficient area where actually we're getting less and less boost as a result, and we're just overworking the components.
For a stage 1 tune, that's going to make quite a dramatic difference.
A big difference there, yeah. And anything that's gone above 170%, we can just correct those values back, just to ensure that we are not exceeding that 170.
Yeah.
Now, you can go into this and start to fine tune, and you start to raise incremental cells up one at a time or piece by piece. But when you do this, just remember, we had multiple maps here. I mean, there's 2 map tables here, just in this one window, if you like.
Don't create yourselves too much work.
And there's another 2 tables we need to look at that have probably got additional tables behind those.
Yeah.
So just be aware of that. I do want to add one more point on here as well, and this is often overlooked by a lot of people. It used to be a case that ECM didn't have scaling for things like the axes. So when you looked at the values, even if it went from 100 RPM difference here, and then the next one jumped 3,000 RPM higher, the intervals in the graphic were at the exact same distance.
Right.
So you couldn't really see the nuances of the curve and the data. But if you look at it now, we have 2 points of data really close here. As we go further along, the values jump massively. It is one of the things that was requested quite a lot. We put this request into Alientech as well, and they've added this into ECM, so it is a vastly improved piece of software. So we're going to close that, and we've got the option now that we can apply those changes to the second map as well. So if we want to copy those increases on, we can keep the same percentage changes, And the correlation control here is basically going to use a formula saying, look, if this fits within the same data values as the first map, I'll make similar changes in similar places. So I'll press OK, and that's those 2 limiter maps modified. Now we have additional limiters on there. We're not going to go into those now. Make the same changes to the same maps in the same way if it has the same data. If the limiter is at 500%, don't change it. The limiter was at 101% of cylinder filling. Again, don't change it because it wasn't limiting the vehicle under normal driving conditions. So that's our limiter modified. We then have to go back to our requested engine load. And the reason we need to go back into here is because, of course, now our limiter sits above our request. So what happens if the boost isn't limited and we hit our target request, or we exceed it and go to 169% of air? Well, it's going to stop requesting. You're going to end up with this surging effect of the boost coming sort of on and off and on and off as you increase up. We need to keep the structure that was there inside of the standard ECU. So before this was above our limiter, now it sits below, we need to raise these values up. But we've got a bit of a problem there. It says 174, that's not really that high compared to our previous difference between the two ECUs, between the two map tables. So there are other things you can look at inside of the ECU. You can look at some of our fueling maps, things like exhaust gas temperature maps, if you have them inside of your driver, are a useful thing to look at. But checking different map groups and different map tables can sometimes give you an indication of a higher value you can go to. Now we don't have anything in here on the screen for our exhaust gas temperature. Just checking through there, can't see anything in our injection system for that. So what we're going to need to do is apply a little bit of common sense and logic. We saw values going up to 1.3 bar in our turbo system. So we know we can go higher than that 170% of air. Okay, 1.3 bar would be 1300 millibar. We now need to, oh crikey, divide that by 10, 130. And add the 70 back on, which would give us 200% of air. Do recommend slow that down, go back over it a couple of times and take that formula down. But we're basically reversing the formula we did before to work out what percentage of air was as a turbo pressure. We're now flipping that the other way. What is 1,300 millibar as a percentage of air using the reverse of that formula? So that shows us 200% of air. So I can maintain a similar relationship here to the new limiter, put this up to about 180, 190. Still within the values that we're seeing within the ECU. Yeah. And that's critical. We're not putting something crazy in there of 500% and going, well, the request is up, that's great. Well, actually, it's up so high that the ECU might not recognize it and we get an internal calculation error and it defaults back to a lower value. Yeah. Almost as an anti-tune. It's the opposite of the tune we're looking for. So you might look at this and go, well, we need to make changes in the same area in the same way. We need to an area A and an area B. We don't need to do that. The request sat just flatly above our limiter. It's the limiter that controls the delivery of the power, the curvature of that torque curve and that boost curve on there. The request map just simply sits above it. So with that in mind, we can literally change the whole 95% column. We'll put it at 190, we could put it at 200% of air. And that raises that value up. Now again, when you look at something like this in 3D, which again is quite a cool function inside of the ECM software, we can rotate the image around, or we can right click on the mouse and rotate, and we can toggle between our original values with the escape key and see the change on there. If you feel your request is too aggressive, well, and you can come to the previous row of data, or column of data I should say, and you can increase those values up as well. So we can increase these up. Let's turn the num lock off, there we go. We can increase those up with the page up key. And a small additional change there just makes that a little bit more progressive and a little smoother inside of the map table. Again, why have we gone from 500 RPM? Well, we didn't have to. We could have gone from 2,000 if we wanted to. But by doing the entire column, it's actually a little bit safer than accidentally selecting only from 2,500 and above, because you got distracted with a customer, a phone call, and you clicked on the wrong cell. Remember, at 500 RPM, it was unable to achieve the standard boost value of 174% of cylinder filling. Okay, so that's our air really sort of changed, our request and our limiter changed on there. One more quick little change we'll make in our turbo system before we move to our fueling, and that was this limiter that we're now sort of brushing up against. Before we were quite a way below this, we're now brushing up against these values. So we can, probably about 2,500 RPM, just increase these values up, and we're just going to take a value that already exists inside of this table. Again, keeping that headroom there. We've not gone crazy. We're still below the turbo pressure at base height value of 1.3 bar. We're making a very safe, conservative stage 1 tune on there, just using the values that are inside the driver and the ECU. This is without any data logging, without any access to a dyno. You're sat there remotely. You've got to tune the vehicle at the side of the road and it can't be tested anywhere. You can still use the data inside of the ECU to make a nice, safe performance tune.
Yeah, and you can immediately see the changes it's going to make.
Yeah. So, turbo, done. Air control, done. We now need to look at our Lambda maps. Now, our Lambda maps, ideally, should be fine straight from the factory. We've got Lambda 1 on here, which is equivalent to 14.7 AFR. Depending on the calibration in the ECU you're working with, for example, let's say an EcoBoost Ford, little 1 litre EcoBoost Fiestas, very popular for tuning, 2 litre Focuses, etc. Things like that will have not 14.7 as the Lambda value, as the stoic value. They're on things like 14.5 because they're factoring in ethanol content into the fuel now.
Okay.
So the later vehicles, whilst we always used to work on 14.7 as the air-fuel ratio, just factor in now that all new cars really are designed to be running on sort of, ideally not E10, but things like E10. And it will vary from country to country with things like flex fuel and stuff as well. Okay. So we've got our target Lambda here. We can see it runs a little bit richer on the right-hand side, 0.9 on the Lambda, which is approximately 13.2, 13.3 air-fuel ratio, or air-to-fuel ratio if you convert it into the AFR readings. This in its own right should be absolutely fine for the vehicle. In reality, we probably actually want to run lean. We want to run above Lambda 1 to get the most power out of the engine. Yeah. Unfortunately, gasoline engines like to get very hot, so we have to overfuel as a way of compensating for that. A mistake that often happens, and we see this a lot with people that have been doing diesel tuning for a long time and they transition to gasoline. In a diesel, you throw fuel at the vehicle and it just chugs away, throws some smoke out the back, but it pretty much delivers more power and torque. Gasoline engines don't work like that. If you throw lots of fuel at them, all that will do is basically drop the combustion temperature and it will make almost a wet combustion, potentially wet the spark plug, you don't get a combustion and you lose power. So when a gasoline engine gets hot, it overfuels to cool itself down. So in an ideal world, we would want to lean these values out, but because we've increased our boost pressure, it's going to struggle to maintain this 0.9 Lambda because there's more air going in there, and while it will adjust fueling to keep to that target, it's going to struggle to operate within its ideal operating temperatures as a result of the excess pressure. More air, more friction, more heat, bigger combustion, more temperature. So from around about 65% on the torque and about 2,000 RPM, we typically select an area like this and we would reduce the Lambda value to increase the fueling. So a couple of ways you can do this. You can either set the values to what you want them to be. So we could overwrite the values here, for example, and set them to 0.86, which would be about 12.7-ish on the AFR gauge. Or you could use a percentage curve and you could reduce the values down. So we could go the other way and we could put minus values in here. -4, -4, -7. And we can bring the values down. Okay, so that's a little bit richer than we're ideally looking for, but it's to demonstrate how you can make those changes on there. The vehicle will transition so quickly through this map that trying to make a perfectly smooth scaled change in here isn't essential, unless you're operating in such a condition or, let's say, race environment or sudden controlled 45-degree hill that's 15 miles long, then yes, you may be operating in very specific loading areas, but traditionally you're going to run through this map very quickly to the maximum torque output, all the way down, and then you'll change gear and then jump back into this map when you get back onto the throttle.
Makes sense.
Okay. We've reduced the Lambda value for the request, but when we look at our component protection, it's overly safe. mean, this one goes down to 0.7, 0.71, and if we look at the second one, we're almost down to 0.6 lambda. We're talking sort of down into the low 10s, even into the 9 AFR range. Okay, if you're running some sort of 1500, 2000 horsepower car, you might want to be running that from a safety point of view on gear shifts and so on. But for a normal stage 1, stage 2 tune, this is too rich. And remember, it's not because of anything we've done with the tuning that's causing the vehicle to go to this area. It's because of all the overly safe protection maps that are in the ECU that we still want to run, but they're constantly pulling power back, often in conditions where it wasn't needed. They're preemptive. So before the engine gets hot, it's going to overfuel. Before a component starts over, it's going to start overfueling. So we still want this map to operate, but if we select the values that in this case are below 0.82, 0.81, we can lean this map out slightly so it still functions as it should, but there's not such a huge transition between the requested lambda and this map, causing us to suddenly go from a okay fueling to massively rich and losing all of the power. So with that in mind, we would use the edit map function, and something around the 0.81 value range would be more than acceptable on this vehicle. Again, remember, take into account your climatic conditions. In reality, you want a data log. If you're going to go any further or more extreme with these maps, you need to data log and ensure that you're not having an adverse effect. We're still allowing it to run way richer than it needs to. It will still reduce power when it gets to this map table, but it's going to do it in a softer, more progressive way and not act like a sudden sort of showstopper pulling all the boost. Again, when you make changes to maps like this, you must be consistent and make changes to similar maps in a similar way. So that's our injection system done. Just conscious of time on there, we're going to jump into our spark system now. Now, spark advance, and we also have, let's just look at that, our optimum spark advance. Let's just look at the values quickly here. The top end of this table for our optimum spark advance shows 27 degrees down to 21. Quite high values up here, 27 degrees. We'll take the maximum value. If we look at our base map, 13 degrees. That's a 14 degree swing in our timing, in the angle. What that's saying is this base map is the base, the default the car is going to try and run. Now there's multiple of these maps, there's 4 of them here for example, so at least 4 different strategies or modes the vehicle can be running in. If we take it on face value of just this one table, we've got, I said what, 14 degrees difference in there. If I start to increase these values here, it doesn't change the optimum. The ECU will still try and get to that optimum itself. It will adjust its own timing. This ECU is adaptive. It will try and reach that optimum timing value if all the conditions and criteria are correct, if it is happy with the values that are there. Now there's 2 things to be aware of here. First of all, we've taken the ECU to 170% of air. We already have factory values that are here. Before you make any timing changes, you must data log. There is no point in putting a generic sort of, oh, we'll put 1.5 degrees on here because I've seen that done on a few ECUs, so that must be what's done. Well, what age is the car? What is the mileage? What is the service history like on there? What fuel grade is it running? What conditions is it running in? And so on and so forth. And remember, we've increased the boost pressure, so by default, we should be reducing the timing. That's already in here. So data log the car. If you've got no knock, no detonation, and the car is running the exact values you expect it to do when you data log, then yes, incrementally increase these, a degree or 2 at a time at most, data log the car and test again. For this, I wouldn't modify the timing. However, I'll show you the area that we would typically modify if we needed more timing in here or it's running very good fuel quality and there's no knock on the engine. We'll be looking at probably from 2,250, maybe 2,500 RPM and up, in this case down, but higher up the RPM band, because this is where we have positive values. We do not modify negative or 0 values when it comes to timing because they are too close to top dead center. Yeah. And if it's a negative value, there's a reason that's in there. There is so much pressure, strain, and let's be honest, risk of detonation down here, low load areas, lugging the engine, full throttle at low RPM in a high gear, that's where something is really going to take the strain and probably break. You're not giving the engine chance to get into its stride, to build up speed before increasing the pressures and the strain on it. And in this area here, we'd be probably a maximum of about 3 degrees of timing, whether it's a turbo or naturally aspirated cars, that real sort of baseline change on there. And again, factoring in where those changes are going to be. We're trying to get to that maximum RPM as quick as we can. I don't need 3 degrees of timing at 6,500 RPM,
Right.
but it's going to be sort of across this area. So we'd probably start with the 3 here, up to about 2.5. I'll just show this on the screen if we do it incremental. We might look something like this, 3, 2, 2, and 1. This is where we want the extra bit of timing to try and get us higher up the RPM band as quick as we can. It's not about just throwing loads of timing at the top end.
But typically on a stage 1 on this ECU, you wouldn't necessarily do timing on this.
No, this ECU is lovely for information purposes, but we can close, we can walk away from the timing on there.
Conscious we're coming up to the hour.
Yep.
How are we doing?
We are good. We've got a little bit to do in our talk, and we're going to talk about rail pressure quickly now, and that covers us off. So rail pressure, we have 15 MPa on there, or 150 bar of pressure. We just double check against our rail pressure limiter, because sometimes on some of the ECUs you'll see a much higher value. So some of the higher end, so the V8 Volkswagen Audi Group, for example, you may see 18 in here where your request is only 15. Again, giving you a clue, well, I can really increase the values. But what we recommend is on the normal gasoline engines, especially when you get into sort of your turbo engines, if you're going to make a change to the rail pressure to support the other changes we've made, you're looking for about 2,500 RPM. And we can see on the top here, we've got percentage of torque again. We only really need it sort of towards that sort of 60% and above in this bottom corner. It doesn't need to go any higher because the manufacturer's decided, well, from 70% and above, we're going to use the same value. So again, just because a value stops here doesn't mean this map only functions to that point. It's just saying they didn't need the scaling and data after that. We come into here, anywhere from sort of 5 to 10%. I would always recommend a 5% change as your maximum to begin with. And then when you make changes to all of the rail pressure maps that all have similar values, you must ensure you make a change to the limiter. Otherwise, very quickly, when the customer is on full boost, full load, probably when they're a good hour or two away from you, it's suddenly going to throw a fuel pressure fault, rail pressure code.
You sound like you've been there. It's been a long journey.
It's been a long journey, yeah. So same on the limiters. So that's our rail done as well. We do need to look at the torque. Now, whilst we haven't got a direct relation in the other maps to the torque, saying, oh, if we've increased boost by X amount, the torque is increased by this, we can take values that are inside this ECU already, as we've already seen, with things like limiter and maximum torque at 400 Newton meters. If we're increasing for a stage 1, sort of 30 to 40 horsepower, nice safe tuning here, for about 30, 35 horsepower, then our torque is going to be probably in around about 70 Newton meters more. Well, that would take us from, let's go find our limiter, 280 to about 350. Makes sense. But our request is only at 330, so we're going to have to do the same that we did with our boost pressure with our torque maps. So I'm going to build our limiter up here. I'm going to take this up to 350. Take all those values in there. The 6,500 is kind of irrelevant because it's never going to do 300 Newton meters at that point anyway. But we'll just take all of the values that are there and we'll edit them up to 350. So it's taking the 280s and increasing them up to 350. Again, 1700 RPM, it's not going to do that. Because we made that smooth scale change on our target, this is the area that's going to be affected. So that's our limiter raised, but now it's very important that we come back into our torque request map and do similar changes in a similar area. Otherwise, the limiter is going to sit above the request. We're going to end up with that almost like internal communication fault. So in a similar way that we would with a torque request on a diesel almost, that 65 to 70% on the pedal and above, this is the area we need to modify. It's not a greatly detailed map, and you can see most of the focus for detail is in the lower load areas and RPM. But in this area here, we probably want to bring this up to 400 Newton meters. So we can actually do this in a slightly different way to the others where we did percentage. We can do an absolute increment, put 70 in the last cells, brings us up to 400 here, but it's also scaled the values in between as well. So I turn percentage off and look at the increase. it's automatically filled in the middle there, 35. And finally, if I check in the 3D, it's kept a nice, smooth, linear sort of line on there for the request. It's nothing crazy, no big spikes in the map that are going to create any sort of driving issues or any erratic feelings to the vehicle. And again, we've got some multiple maps in there, so we're going to copy the increments, and this time absolute. Remember, it remembers the last value you selected. We modified as absolute, physical change, we need to carry that over to the other maps in the same way. And finally, you've got a couple more map tables in here. We need to do those in a similar way. If you do push further on this map, which it's possible to do, data logging, things, etc., and you bring your limiters up to sort of 400 Newton meters, then other limiters that were already at that value, you need to follow the same logic, just increase them up slightly. So that is a whistle-stop tour. Granted, we haven't changed the multiple versions of the same maps, just so we can cover them all off. But
I think people
covers
get
the
that.
core
you've emphasised
data
that
changes.
Point. I
Yeah,
think they probably understand that point. Okay, so you've gone 1 minute over, Simon.
Oh,
but then we did have a slightly delayed start.
Yeah, makes up for last week.
Great. Guys, I hope you enjoyed that. Quite a lot to cover there. As always, these webinars will be live in the next day or two on our webinar page, but also on YouTube too. So if you want to see all of that again, don't feel you need to make every note. You can watch it again and again. And if you've got any questions, something still doesn't add up, please do drop us an email and we'll be very happy to help.
Yeah.
I think the next session is on the 7th of July.
Yes.
And we want to leave, as always, the subject matter to you. We've got a couple of choices for you. Alientech, of course, have fairly recently launched data logging. We like it very much. Simon has mentioned data logging quite a lot in today's session. So we could offer an opportunity to do some live data logging and talk you through those features and functions. We also have an opportunity perhaps to do the same exercise as we've just done, but in the Magic Motorsport Stage X software, or quite popular fairly recently, a few months ago, we did just a random open question and answer session where you can literally just send in any question. So if you've got any preference of what we do on the 7th of July, you've got about 10 days or so to fire those points in, and we'll try and take on any recommendations. I'm quite favouring the idea of doing data logging.
I think data logging can be quite good, yeah. It's something a little bit different. It's often not covered in much sort of detail, but just to show you guys how easy it is to do it with things like the CARES and the PowerGate now obviously offering data logging as well. So you can send a tool out to your customer
anywhere in the world.
Yeah, regardless of whether you're tuning it on that, you can get the data logging.
I think what's important, when I've seen people talk about data logging and showing it, they very much show the features and functions of it, but don't relate it back to the tuning. And I think that's where we'll try and go with this next session, unless anyone has got any strong alternatives. Yeah. Other than that, you know how to get hold of us. Anything else you want to cover today, Simon?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on there as well. Obviously, from a training point of view, we do go through this at a little bit of speed as we're quite short on time for these things. If you do have any questions about the content we've covered or any other training questions, then do obviously reach out to us. We do arrange consultations with fellow tuners before you book training courses, the in-class and even online, to make sure you've got the right course for you for your sort of needs and requirements. I will have one shameless plug coming up. We do have in July our 2 EBC certified courses, our in-classroom courses. So that is
they're UK, aren't they?
They are UK, yes. That's our official EBC certified courses. And of course, we have coming up for our international customers. You're welcome to the UK, of course, as well. But we have in August in Florida. I do have some dates here. One moment, please. 10th to the 12th of August, we have our gasoline EVC course. That's in West Palm Beach. Lovely place to go at that time of the year.
Training.
And then following straight on the back of that, 13th through to the 15th, we're running our really, really popular heavy diesel training course.
And places are already a bit limited in heavy diesel.
Yes, heavy diesel sells really quickly.
And the
There's
other
a few
thing I will
places
quickly
left on
mention, SEMA, believe it or not, seems a really long way away, but SEMA is actually already booking up. And diesel fully booked out last year quite early, and already we've got quite a few bookings for our SEMA training. So we do 3 days before SEMA on gasoline, 3 days after, so you're still there for the full show, but at the weekends either end, we stay on to do some training. The diesel one is booking up fast.
Yeah.
End of the shameless plugs. As always, you know to get hold of us if you've got any questions at all. It's good night from me.
And it's good night from me.
Cheers, guys.